These are 11 of the most iconic villains in cinema history, and every single one of them is more memorable than the hero who tried to stop them. The hero exists to resolve the story, and the villain exists to be the story. Heroes carry the weight of morality, duty, and the obligation to do what is right, while the villain carries none of that burden. No rules, no ceiling, no compromise. And that freedom is precisely what makes them magnetic. Villains get the best lines, the best costumes, the most psychological depth, and the heaviest symbolic weight, which is why every October, millions of people dress as the Joker, Darth Vader, and Michael Myers, while almost nobody shows up as Luke Skywalker, Frodo, or Neo. Here are 11 of the most unforgettable antagonists ever put on screen, and exactly why none of us can forget them. The Joker. No villain in cinema history has been interpreted twice at the highest level, but the Joker has managed exactly that. Nicholson's 1989 version in Batman established what a cinematic supervillain could look like, playing a gangster who seizes power and then abandons every rational criminal motivation in favor of pure, gleeful destruction. Money holds no interest for him, territory means nothing, and his chosen weapon against Gotham is poisoning its toiletries simply because he finds it funny. The suits are meticulously pressed, the lapel flower squirts acid, the joy buzzer kills, and the entire performance rests on a single idea. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who no longer needs a reason. Ledger arrived in 2008 and stripped all of that away, replacing the theatrical flair with pocket knives, gasoline, and one recurring question.
Why so serious?
The performance presented itself as pure chaos, a man with no agenda and no goal beyond watching systems collapse. But here's the thing, the chaos was constructed. Every act of apparent anarchy traced back to precise, methodical planning, and the Joker manufactured the illusion of randomness with more discipline than anyone else in the film. Ledger prepared in isolation, locking himself away to develop the character's physicality, voice, and psychology, and he died on January 22, 2008, 6 months before The Dark Knight reached theaters. He never witnessed the response, never saw the Academy Award, and won Best Supporting Actor posthumously in February 2009, the first time that honor had gone to a comic book performance. The debate between the two portrayals has run ever since, with Nicholson loyalists arguing his version captures a man who acts purely on comedic impulse, while Ledger defenders maintain the 2008 version transcended the source material entirely. Both positions hold water, and the fact that one character could produce two performances of that magnitude across completely different eras is the clearest possible proof that the Joker is the story. Batman is just the reason it has to end. Hannibal Lecter. 20 minutes of screen time, 1 Academy Award for Best Actor, and the most quoted line in the film. That is the Hannibal Lecter equation, and it does not add up until you understand what Hopkins actually built. The Silence of the Lambs opened February 14, 1991, on a $19 million budget and earned $272.7 million worldwide, then swept the 64th Academy Awards by taking Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. Only the third film in history to accomplish that, and still the only horror film to win Best Picture. Hopkins drove all of it while barely appearing. The vocal foundation came from HAL 9000, the artificial intelligence from 2001, A Space Odyssey, which Hopkins used as a model for Lecter's mechanical, unblinking delivery, describing the character as a living nightmare machine. The behavioral template came from a real person, a former acting teacher at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, who was known for intellectually dismantling students with a pleasant expression on his face. Before filming began, Hopkins made 2 decisions that reshaped the character. When director Jonathan Demme suggested an orange prison jumpsuit, Hopkins refused on the grounds that Lecter's intelligence would have allowed him to manipulate his captors into providing tailored clothing. When Demme planned to show Lecter reading as Clarice approached, Hopkins rejected that too, telling the director, "I can smell her coming down the corridor," insisting instead that Lecter would be standing perfectly still in the center of his cell, waiting. Sean Connery received the first offer and reportedly called the script disgusting, turning it down outright, while Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and Jeremy Irons all came and went without taking the role. None of them ended up in the film, and none of them would have delivered what Hopkins did. The liver and fava beans line, which became the film's most enduring moment, also carries a medical joke most audiences miss entirely. Fava beans and Chianti contain tyramine, which can be fatal when combined with MAOIs, the early psychiatric antidepressants used to manage violent patients. Lecter was not simply confessing to murder, he was announcing he had stopped taking his medication. The monster was always hiding inside the civility. Lord Voldermort. 37 minutes and 15 seconds of screen time across 8 films, a franchise that earned $7.7 billion at the global box office, and every character in every story is defined by their relationship to him. Voldemort does not need more time on screen, because his absence is just as threatening as his presence. Ralph Fiennes made his debut as the character in 2005's Goblet of Fire, and he came within a decision of never taking the role. His hesitation, which he later called misplaced snobbery, centered on concerns that the prosthetics and visual effects requirements would reduce the performance to a technical exercise, and the preparation process proved those concerns were not entirely wrong. The makeup effects team originally built a practical silicone prosthetic to physically cover Fiennes' nose and create the snake-like facial structure the character required, but producers rejected the sculpts. The final solution placed tracking markers across Fiennes' face every single day so his nose could be digitally removed in post-production, while intricate temporary tattoo transfers simulating vein patterns were applied across his head and body before each shoot. Fiennes also wrestled with the costume itself, specifically a one-piece garment that slipped during filming, a problem he solved with a garter belt that he then used to cheerfully antagonize the stunt crew between takes. What makes Voldemort genuinely dangerous as a character, though, is not the look but the philosophy. His stated belief that
There is no good and evil. There is only power. And those too weak to seek it.
positions him not as a monster, but as the only honest person in the room, at least by his own reckoning. That distinction, the villain who believes completely in his own rightness, separates a memorable antagonist from a standard one. As of early 2026, the HBO television reboot is in active production for a 2027 release, and the Voldemort casting sits as the most consequential decision in the project. Fiennes has publicly hinted the role may already be filled, suggesting Cillian Murphy as the ideal successor during a press tour for his 2025 film, 28 Years Later. Michael Myers. Halloween was made on a budget of between $300,000 and $325,000, earned $70 million worldwide, paid Jamie Lee Curtis $8,000 and Nick Castle $25 a day, and permanently changed what horror cinema was allowed to do, all because the director decided not to explain anything. John Carpenter named the character The Shape in the script. Not a person, not a psychology, just a shape, an absence of humanity wearing a human silhouette. Donald Pleasance, playing the psychiatrist who spent 15 years studying Myers, delivers the film's thesis in one speech.
What was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Carpenter used the newly developed Steadicam to place the audience inside the killer's first-person perspective, making viewers complicit in the predation before they had processed what they were watching, and the film earned its place in the National Film Registry in 2006 for pioneering the modern slasher genre entirely on the back of that structural decision. The film attracted serious academic scrutiny almost immediately. Film scholar Carol Clover argued the film frames sexuality as the trigger for violence, positioning Myers as a punitive force against suburban teenage behavior, and Carpenter acknowledged that reading, noting that the surviving character was written with what he described as sexually repressed energy. Whether that was deliberate moral commentary or an unconscious structural pattern has been debated in film programs ever since. When the franchise rebooted in 2018 as a direct sequel to the original, erasing 4 decades of accumulated lore, veteran stunt performer James Jude Courtney took over the physical role and faced the challenge of honoring Nick Castle's original stiff, unyielding movement while acknowledging 40 years had passed. His solution was to study his pet cat, implementing a feline efficiency of movement that made Myers feel simultaneously familiar and more predatory. The Shape does not need a motive, and that has always been the point, and that is why the character is still frightening in 2026. Tony Montana. Brian De Palma and Oliver Stone built Scarface in 1983 as a warning, a portrait of the American dream pursued without mercy or restraint, and the culture looked at that warning and turned it into a poster. Production ran from November 1982 through May 1983 on a budget of between $23.5 million and $37 million, earning $66.4 million worldwide, with Golden Globe nominations going to Pacino for Best Actor. The project originated with Pacino himself, who watched the original 1932 version and brought it to producers, but Sidney Lumet, hired first to direct, departed after disagreements over tone, wanting a politically focused film, while De Palma wanted excess. De Palma won that argument. Stone wrote the screenplay while managing a severe cocaine addiction, relocating to Paris specifically to create physical distance from the drug, describing it as destructive to his ability to function. The irony of writing a film about cocaine while surviving cocaine is not subtle. Filming faced organized resistance in Miami, where the Cuban community protested out of concern the narrative would entrench harmful stereotypes about their public image, which pushed the majority of production to Los Angeles, with only 2 weeks spent in Florida. The Motion Picture Association rejected the film 3 consecutive times with an X rating, citing extreme violence, particularly a chainsaw dismemberment sequence. And on the 4th appeal, the board finally issued an R rating. De Palma then released his original uncut version in theaters anyway, and only admitted to the substitution months after the premiere. Montana's most quoted line, "Say hello to my little friend," has become one of the most recognized phrases in American popular culture. But his second most important line is the one that reveals everything about why the character endures.
You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
He understood exactly what he was, so did the audience, and they embraced him anyway. Darth Vader. Darth Vader was built by at least 4 separate people, none of whom fully understood what they were creating, and the result became the defining villain of the 20th century. George Lucas released Star Wars on May 25, 1977, in a limited 32 theaters, working from an $11 million budget that ran $3 million over, and the film eventually earned $775.4 million cumulatively across its re-releases, while collecting 6 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, and a place in the National Film Registry by 1989. Concept artist Ralph McQuarrie designed the visual identity by merging samurai aesthetics with the imagery of a mechanical life support system, and for the physical performance, Lucas cast British bodybuilder David Prowse, who had been offered the role of Chewbacca first. Prowse chose Vader deliberately because he believed the villain would be the most memorable element of the film, and he was correct about everything except what would happen to his voice. Lucas determined that Prowse's West Country English accent undercut the character's authority completely, and the search for a replacement voice led first to Orson Welles, then away from him on the grounds that Welles would be too recognizable. James Earl Jones recorded his contribution in a matter of hours, received $7,000 for it, and remained completely uncredited for the role until 1983, while his voice became one of the most recognized sounds in global entertainment history.
The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
The financial treatment of David Prowse stands as one of the more documented grievances in Hollywood accounting history. Despite providing the physical framework for one of cinema's most famous characters, Prowse reportedly never received residual payments for Return of the Jedi because the studio declared the film had never technically turned a net profit, even as it sat among the 15 highest-grossing films in United States history at the time. Prowse went to his grave without those residuals. As of early 2026, Disney and Lucasfilm have scheduled a theatrical re-release of A New Hope for April 30, 2027, to mark the franchise's 50th anniversary, and every conversation around that celebration will center on the character Prowse, built from the outside in. Gordon Gekko. Gordon Gekko never raises his voice in genuine anger, never throws a punch, and destroys people with information, leverage, and a perfectly tailored suit. And the film designed to condemn him accidentally inspired a generation to idolize him instead. Wall Street opened December 11, 1987, on a budget of $16.5 million and earned $43.8 million worldwide, with Michael Douglas taking the Academy Award for Best Actor. Oliver Stone and co-writer Stanley Weiser built the film as a sharp critique of 1980s corporate culture, using Gekko to embody systemic greed, and then watched the character escape the film's moral framework entirely. Warren Beatty and Richard Gere both passed on the role before Douglas accepted it, entirely unaware he was the third option, a fact he only discovered decades later at a retrospective panel at the TCM Classic Film Festival in early 2026. The Greed is Good monologue,
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Officially recognized by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 greatest movie quotes in American cinema, was not invented. Weiser drew it directly from an actual commencement speech delivered by convicted inside trader Ivan Boesky at the University of California Berkeley Business School in 1986. Boesky told the graduating class, "I think greed is healthy. You can be greedy and still feel good about yourself," and was later convicted and hit with a $100 million government penalty. What nobody expected was the audience response, and Weiser documented it repeatedly. Young executives approached him at events to say the film had changed their lives and made them want to be exactly like Gordon Gekko, missing the moral critique completely. Douglas's performance was so persuasive that it sent people into high-finance careers to emulate the character Stone built as a villain. The critique lost, the villain won, and the monologue outlasted the film's entire cautionary framework. Agent Smith. Agent Smith is not a character in the traditional sense. He is a system that developed opinions, and those opinions are the most unsettling thing in the film. The Matrix opened March 31, 1999, on a budget of $63 to $65 million, earning $466 to $467.8 million worldwide. pioneering bullet-time visual effects and reshaping the aesthetic language of action cinema. The Wachowskis wrote and directed, with Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, and Carrie-Anne Moss rounding out the central cast, and the role of Agent Smith originally went to Jean Reno, who declined because relocating to Australia for the production shoot conflicted with family obligations. Hugo Weaving stepped in and brought something to the role that a physically imposing presence alone could not have delivered, a specific, calibrated intellectual contempt that Reno's quiet gravity likely would not have found. Weaving's preparation centered on a single question. What does a mind sound like when it has removed all human empathy? His answer pulled from two sources, 1950s news anchors and the astronomer Carl Sagan, building a vocal delivery that was simultaneously authoritative, precise, and deeply alien, where every sentence arrives like a verdict already rendered. Smith's most famous monologue, delivered during an interrogation,
"You're a disease, a cancer of this planet,"
and frames the machines as the cure. And what makes it linger is that the film never fully dismantles the argument. The controversy around Weaving's absence from 2021's The Matrix Resurrections is well documented. He was originally part of director Lana Wachowski's plans, had actively restructured his schedule to balance the film alongside a theater commitment. And after 8 weeks of negotiations, Wachowski changed her position and moved forward without him, with Jonathan Groff inheriting the role. Audiences responded badly to that decision, and as of 2026, a fifth Matrix film written and directed by Drew Goddard is in active development, with Weaving's potential return still unconfirmed. Annie Wilkes. Every other villain on this list operates at a remove. Darth Vader is in a different galaxy. Hannibal Lecter is behind glass. The Joker is a force of urban chaos. But Annie Wilkes is in the next room, and she just brought you soup. Misery opened November 30th, 1990, on a budget of $18 to $20 million. Earned $61.3 million worldwide. And at the following Academy Awards, Kathy Bates won Best Actress for the role, making it the first and only Oscar ever awarded to a Stephen King film adaptation. Rob Reiner directed. William Goldman wrote the screenplay from King's 1987 novel, and Goldman was also the one who championed Bates for the role when she was still a relatively unknown stage actress. The studio considered Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson for the male lead before settling on James Caan. For Annie Wilkes, no comparable shortlist existed. Bates and Reiner constructed the character from the inside out, building a psychological backstory grounded in severe childhood abuse, and that unseen history became the engine behind Wilkes' volatility. The reason she can shift from attentive caregiver to violent captor within a single scene without the transition feeling false. Wilkes defies every conventional villain template by design. She wears dowdy clothing, detests actual profanity, and substitutes invented words like cock-a-doodle, dirty bird, brings medication, prepares meals, and then picks up a sledgehammer. The hobbling sequence, in which she breaks the protagonist's ankles, was actually toned down from the novel's original version, and audiences were still shocked into silence by what remained. That sequence permanently altered the cultural understanding of obsessive fandom, a conversation that grew considerably louder with the rise of parasocial relationships in the digital era. And when Misery was added to HBO Max in September 2025, it immediately entered the top 10 most streamed titles on the platform, 35 years after release. Annie Wilkes remains the most frightening person in any room she enters because she looks completely like she belongs there. Jack Torrance. Stanley Kubrick did not make a ghost story. He made a story about a man who was already becoming a monster before the hotel ever got involved, and he used Jack Nicholson to make that argument without ever stating it directly. The Shining opened May 23, 1980 in the United States and October 2, 1980 in the United Kingdom, produced on a $19 million budget and earning $50 million worldwide. Kubrick co-wrote the screenplay with novelist Diane Johnson, deliberately steering away from a traditional supernatural framework because Kubrick did not believe in an afterlife and wanted the horror to remain psychological, ambiguous, and impossible to fully resolve. Stephen King despised the adaptation and said so publicly, arguing that Nicholson's Torrance appears mentally unstable from the opening scene, which he felt destroyed the tragedy of a man who deteriorates gradually. Kubrick's counterargument, built into every frame, was that the deterioration was always the destination, and the hotel simply accelerated the arrival. What makes the performance genuinely disturbing is its domestic architecture. Torrance is not an invader from outside. He is the father, the husband, the man assigned to protect the people he ultimately hunts through the Overlook's corridors. Filming took place almost entirely at EMI Elstree Studios in England, where Kubrick ran an unusually small crew through an extraordinarily high volume of takes, and the sequence in which Torrance stalks his wife up a staircase while she weakly swings a baseball bat was reportedly filmed 127 times. Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy Torrance, experienced severe dehydration, panic attacks, and physical hair loss during production. Kubrick had deliberately isolated her to produce genuine terror, and the 1981 Golden Raspberry Awards responded by nominating her for Worst Actress. That nomination was officially rescinded in 2022, with the Razzie Committee acknowledging that her performance had been extracted under conditions of deliberate psychological duress. Here's Johnny, ranked 68th on the American Film Institute's list of the 100 greatest movie quotations in American cinema, came from improvisation, not the script, and the set itself was constructed with deliberate spatial impossibilities. Doors leading nowhere, windows inside interior hallways, geometries that should not exist in any real building. The hotel is wrong. Torrance is becoming wrong, and Kubrick frames them as reflections of each other from the first scene to the last. Hans Gruber. Before 1988, action cinema villains were largely divided between muscular enforcers and screaming megalomaniacs, and then Alan Rickman walked into a Christmas party in a designer suit and changed the category permanently. Die Hard opened July 15, 1988, with principal photography running from November 1987 through March 1988 at Fox Plaza in Los Angeles. Produced on a budget of $25 to $35 million, and earning $139.8 to $141.5 million worldwide, collecting 4 Academy Award nominations in technical categories before earning a place in the National Film Registry in 2017. Rickman was 41 years old when he landed in Los Angeles as a highly respected British stage actor with 0 feature film experience, received the offer 2 days after arriving, and his first response was, "What the hell is this? I'm not doing an action movie." His agents talked him into it. 2 decisions from Rickman's theatrical background defined the character before a frame was shot. The first was rejecting the script's original vision of Gruber in standard tactical gear, successfully persuading producers to put the character in a pristine designer suit, and that single wardrobe change reframed the entire film. Gruber was not a terrorist, he was a gentleman thief who had found terrorism professionally convenient. The second defining moment came from director John McTiernan's deliberate deception. For Gruber's climactic fall from the building, the stunt team dropped Rickman onto a blue screen airbag on the count of 2 rather than the agreed-upon 3, and the genuine shock on Rickman's face, captured in that unguarded moment, is what the audience actually sees. It is reaction, not acting, and it is perfect. Screenwriter Steven D'Souza structured the script with Gruber as the functional protagonist, the character driving every development in the narrative, leaving John McClane to operate purely as a reactionary obstacle, a fly in the ointment, as the film itself describes him. McClane reacts, Gruber initiates, and that structural choice explains why Gruber is unforgettable while the hero is secondary in every conversation about why the film works. If you want more breakdowns of the characters that actually drive cinema, subscribe to Actors Explained. There is more where this came from.